In this week's video, we're going to begin with a summary of the topics that we've already introduced over the last two videos. We'll divide the review into two parts, pitch and rhythm, and then we'll take a short break. After the intermission, we'll introduce the concept of tempo, and then we'll learn several of the terms that we use to describe tempo in music. By the time we wrap up today, you'll have developed a pretty strong foundation of the basics of music theory and notation, which we'll need for the topics coming up in the weeks ahead. Today's video isn't very long, but it's jam-packed with information, so grab your textbook, something to write with, and let's get started. We're going to begin our review with pitch, which is the way we describe the highness or the lowness of a sound. Now, the pitch of a sound is determined by its frequency, which scientists measure using hertz. Musicians, however, use a musical alphabet to refer to pitches and to pitch classes: A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. We can also include a number to specify the exact register of the pitch we're referring to, such as A1 or C4. When we want to represent these pitches using music notation, we do so by placing notes on the lines and spaces of the 5-line staff. A clef is placed at the start of the staff to indicate the orientation of the pitches, and so far we've only been introduced to one clef, the treble clef. It's also colloquially called the G clef, because the lower loop of the treble clef reminds us that the second line corresponds to the pitch G, and from there we can easily fill in the rest of the lines and the spaces. Additionally, we learned how to coordinate the pitches on the staff to the keys on the keyboard. Each of the 7 white keys corresponds to the 7 letters of the musical alphabet, and we use sharp signs and flat signs to either raise or lower these 7 pitches, allowing us to reach the black keys too. As we learned more about these pitches, we started to compare 2 pitches at a time, and to consider the distance between them. We described these distances between pitches as intervals, and we introduced some of the most common intervals that we use. The octave, for example, is the interval that separates A3 from A4, or really any 2 pitches whose frequencies share a 2-to-1 ratio. The smallest interval we commonly used is called the half step, and every octave is equally divided into 12 half steps. Every adjacent key on the musical keyboard, whether it be black or white, is separated by a half step. And the second smallest interval that we use is called the whole step, and it describes an interval separated by 2 half steps. As we learned more about half steps and whole steps, we also began to learn about the musical scale. A scale is formed when a collection of pitches is organized according to its frequency, in either ascending or descending order. We discovered one of the most important and recognizable scales, the chromatic scale, when we took all 12 pitches of the octave and arranged them into scales. The result was a scale where every pitch is located a half step away from both the previous note and the note to come next. We also studied another scale, one that is equally familiar to us but uses fewer notes, and that's the major scale. The major scale is a diatonic scale, which means that it contains exactly 7 pitches, and those 7 pitches are separated by 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. In our explorations already, we deconstructed the C major scale to reveal that precise series of half steps and whole steps. We called that the DNA of the major scale. That interval series is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And we can use this sequence to construct a major scale from any starting pitch we choose. Just follow 3 simple steps. Step 1. Begin by writing the tonic or the starting pitch of the scale. This will always be synonymous with the name and key of the scale. We're going to build a B major scale, so we need to place a B natural on the staff to begin. If the scale begins on a pitch that requires an accidental, be sure to include that alongside your starting note. Step 2. Continue by writing each of the next 7 pitches of the musical alphabet until you arrive at the starting pitch again. But don't add any accidentals at this point. Your only focus right now is laying out the foundation of the scale, making sure you don't skip or repeat any lines or spaces. Now step 3. Go back to the start of the scale and begin the process of adding accidentals. With one eye to our DNA, examine the interval between the first 2 scale degrees. The first interval in a major scale needs to be a whole step, but in this scale that we've laid out, B to C is separated by only a half step. So in order to expand this interval, we raise the C to C sharp with the addition of a sharp sign, and we now have the correct interval, the whole step. Continue along in this fashion, comparing one pair of notes at a time and adding accidentals as necessary until you arrive at the tonic once again. Now remember, major scales never mix flats and sharps. They never skip a letter of the musical alphabet, and they never deviate from whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. In our studies, after having built a few scales using our 3-step process, we started to notice something peculiar. While lots of these scales have notes and accidentals in common with each other, no 2 scales used the exact same number of sharps or flats. Now, when we stumble across a unique identifier like this, we know we've found something special. And sure enough, when there's something special about the music, there's a way to write it down in music notation. In this case, notation has given us the key signature. Essentially, a key signature collects whatever sharps and flats are required by the key or scale, and it places them together as a set at the start of the staff. Look again at our B major scale. We needed 5 sharps in total to build this scale correctly. Now, a key signature collects those 5 sharps and places them at the beginning of the staff. Not only does this instantly indicate the key of the music to come, but it also makes it unnecessary for us to write the accidentals again when these pitches appear later on in the music. Finally, after building a major scale and a key signature for every possible key, we took the last step of visually organizing those scales and key signatures. We chose C major, a key with no sharps or flats, to serve as our fulcrum point. And from there, we laid out all of the sharp keys out to the right and all of the flat keys out to the left, arranged according to the number of accidentals in each key signature. Now that gave us a pretty neat spectrum to visualize the keys, and we thought we were just about done. But then we realized something about the keys at the far ends of this spectrum. These keys aren't polar opposites of each other, like we might expect. No, instead, they are enharmonic equivalents. You see, these keys may use completely different notes, but when played, they sound exactly the same. And when we realized this, it became clear that we don't have a spectrum, we have a circle. We have a circle of fifths. Now, to wrap up this light speed review of pitch, let's conclude with a short review of the specific order that accidentals are arranged within key signatures. Here on the screen, you can see the complete order of accidentals, and above them, you can see the pitch names of the notes that we alter. One way we can remember this order is with the help of the circle of fifths and a little bit of memorization. Sharp keys begin by altering the note F to become F sharp, and then moving clockwise through the circle, successfully altering each note a perfect fifth away. Flat keys do something similar, except they begin by altering the note B to become B flat, and then proceeds counterclockwise, altering notes through the circle. That's all and well when we're given a key, and then we're asked to draw either the scale or the key signature that goes along with it. But what about the other direction? What happens when we're given an unknown key signature and we're asked to identify it? You could lay out a scale, check for where the half steps are, and then deduce which pitch is tonic, but that's a little time consuming and even involves some guesswork, which isn't so hot. As it turns out, there's a shortcut here, but I'm only going to share this with you with the promise that you won't rely on this instead of understanding the concepts at play. Because you see, if you don't know the concepts that this shortcut is connecting, it won't be long before you forget the shortcut altogether. I'll assume that by still watching the video, you're agreeing to enter into a virtual and unbreakable pinky swear of sorts. And so with that, I feel okay sharing this secret with you. This is the secret to finding the tonic to any given key just from glancing at the key signature. If you have a key signature made up of sharp signs, find the last or rightmost sharp and go up a half step. That is tonic. In our example on the screen here, we have 4 sharps, the last of which is D sharp. 1 half step above D sharp is E natural, so that should be our tonic pitch. Sure enough, the key of E major uses 4 sharps. Flat keys are just a little different. When you have flat signs in the key signature, look for the penultimate flat. That's the flat just before the rightmost one. That penultimate flat is your tonic pitch. No need to go up a half step. So here we see a key signature with 4 flats. The second to last flat is A flat. And right as rain, the key of A flat major uses 4 flats. Now, I can't overstress enough how important it is for you to understand the concepts that led us to the shortcut. Otherwise, it's just a recipe for confusion and mistakes. But if you've got a good handle on the basics and you're just having a little trouble with the memorization for now, this can be a really handy tool. For the second part of our review today, we'll focus on rhythm and meter. Rhythm and meter are temporal aspects of the music, which means they concern how musical events unfold over time. Notes, which we've already used to represent pitches, are also used to convey durational values, or how long or short a sound lasts. So far, we only have 4 note durations. From largest to smallest, they are the whole note, the half note, the quarter note, and the eighth note. And each successive duration is smaller by half than the one before. In notation, they are visually differentiated from one another by variations in the note head, the stem, and the flag. And you'll recall that eighth notes can also be beamed together when they appear next to one another. Most of the music that we study is governed by an underlying pulse, steady and predictable, over which melodies and rhythms are laid. We also use the pulse to establish a meter, creating segments from the pulse by emphasizing one beat over the others at regular intervals. Each strong beat indicates the start of a new metrical unit, which we call a measure. And measures are divided on the page by single bar lines. We indicate the meter in music notation through the use of a time signature, which other textbooks actually call a meter signature. Time signatures appear at the start of the music, near the clef and the key signature, and it's comprised of two numbers, one above the other. As we learned last time, the upper number indicates how many beats are going to be contained in each measure, and so virtually any numerical value can go here. The lower number indicates which note value will be used to indicate each of these beats, and since we only have 4 note values in our toolbox at the moment, we only have 4 options for this lower number. Depending on whether we want to represent each beat as a whole note, half note, quarter note, or eighth note, we'll need to use the number 1, 2, 4, or 8, respectively. If meter refers to the measurement of beats between regularly occurring accents, then rhythm refers to the grouping and patterning of notes according to their durational values. Rhythm is a rich and complex aspect to our understanding of music. One of the ways we can develop our understanding of rhythm is through analyzing and performing musical examples without worrying about pitch. Let's work on one together now. On the screen, we have a single line staff, including a percussion clef and a 4/4 time signature at the start of the staff, and a final bar line indicating the end of the example. In between, we have a number of notes of varying durations, but we're missing the bar lines that indicate the start to each measure. Let's begin by supplying these. Our time signature indicates that we should have 4 beats in each measure, and each beat is represented with a quarter note. So we'll begin by reading through the rhythms and accounting for each consecutive beat. Upon counting 4 beats, draw a single bar line, and then begin counting again from 1. When you reach the final bar line, quickly look back to double check that each measure contains the correct number of beats. Now, for our next step, it's time to analyze the rhythm as it relates to these beat counts. We've already laid our framework of beats. We're going to use the word or symbol for and to indicate sounds that begin in the 8th note value between these beats, and we use parentheses around beats to indicate sounds that started on a previous beat but are still being sustained. You can see our rhythmic analysis marked beneath the notes in our example. And all of this analysis is just preparing us for a performance, and that's the most crucial step to developing your command over rhythm. So don't do all this work and then forget the most important step. Using a steady pulse, perform the rhythms by both counting aloud and clapping your hands or patting your thigh. You see, connecting your analysis of the music notation to your voice and your body creates a rich network of connections within your brain. Once again, we're bundling the conceptual and the experiential together so that they can reinforce one another. We're going to tie things off here for the review portion of the video. Now, while there are certainly some topics that we didn't get to revisit today, we did a pretty good job of covering the most salient aspects from our studies so far. Between chapters 4 and 5 in our textbook, Music Fundamentals for Musical Theater, there's an excellent collection of exercises designed to help you learn these concepts even better. After this short break, we're going to conclude today's video with an introduction to tempo. So feel free to hit pause on the next screen to get a drink, stretch your legs, and eat some orange slices. We got more knowledge for you after the break. When we discuss topics like rhythm and meter, it's not long before we come across a third and closely related temporal aspect of music: tempo. Tempo is the Italian word for time, and in music it refers to the speed of the pulse. A tempo marking is used in music notation to describe the tempo of the music, and these indications typically appear at the beginning of the piece. They can also be found within the music, such as at the start of a new section. Historically, composers have used Italian terms for tempo markings, although it's important to note that these markings are relative and actually refer to a range of tempos. That being said, some of the most common markings are the slower tempos largo and adagio, the moderate tempos andante and moderato, and the faster tempos allegro and presto. Recent centuries have brought about another convention for measuring tempo, one that provides much more specific information, and that's the metronome marking. A metronome is a device invented in 1816 by German inventor Johann Melzel at the suggestion of his friend Ludwig van Beethoven. It's a device capable of producing a steady tick-tock of the beats at nearly any tempo, which we measure in terms of beats per minute, or BPM. For example, a metronome marking of 60 BPM would indicate a tempo in which exactly 60 beats are heard in the span of 1 minute. Or put another way, that's one beat occurring every second. Let's take a look at our list of Italian tempo markings once again, and add BPM ranges to each. You can see just how wide the ranges are for some of these tempos. In addition to these tempo markings, we also have tempo alterations, which are just special markings that describe changes made to the tempo. Once again, we're traditionally using Italian terms to indicate tempo alterations, and here are some of the most common to appear. When the music gets gradually faster, we use the term accelerando, which may be abbreviated to ACCEL in your music. When the music gradually gets slower, we use the terms ritardando and rallentando, which can also be abbreviated as RIT and RALL, respectively. We typically use these two terms interchangeably, although there probably is a distinction between them. I use the word probably because even music theorists tend to argue over exactly what the difference is between the two terms, or whether there exists a difference at all. Now, for my money, whatever distinction there may have been at one point in time, it's been practically erased by now, through years and years of composers using the two terms interchangeably. We also have tempo markings that allow us to describe a tempo in comparison to a previous tempo. Più mosso means with more motion, and meno mosso means with less motion. And these Italian phrases essentially translate to faster than before and slower than before. You'll often find these two markings at the start of a new section of music, and they're useful to us when we want to establish a new tempo that isn't so different from the original tempo as to require an entirely different tempo marking. There are also ways for us to indicate a departure from strict tempo in the music. Rubato is yet another Italian term, coming from the verb rubare, to rob, that refers to subtle or nuanced alterations of the rhythms or the tempo, usually without altering the overall sense of the pulse. It's perhaps the most elusive tempo alteration that we're going to study, but it's also one of the most potent and expressive tools available to you as a performer. An example might be slightly elongating a downbeat, or stretching out the top note in a rising phrase, but then catching up for the lost time by slightly shortening or speeding up the other beats of the measure. thereby preserving the overall tempo of the music. Rubato is the ebb and flow in a mature musician's sense of tempo and timing. A more dramatic example of suspended tempo is indicated with the words con la voce, which is Italian for with the voice or with the singer. When this appears in the music, it signifies to the accompanist or to the conductor that a strict tempo is partly or completely suspended, and instead, you should time the events in the accompaniment to coordinate with the singer's performance. This affords singers a huge range of control over the tempo, and it can be used to great effect, such as at the start of How Are Things in Glockamora from Finian's Rainbow, or in the soprano cadenza at the end of Vanilla Ice Cream from She Loves Me. And the final tempo marking for us to cover today is one that will often appear after many of the markings we've just introduced. A tempo is the marking that we use whenever we want to return to a previous tempo, either after speeding up or slowing down, at the end of a rubato or con la voce passage, or even when returning to the tempo from the start of the piece if there are sections in between in the music that have distinctly different tempos. You can almost think of this like the natural sign of tempos. Whichever alterations came before, a tempo is going to cancel those effects and return us to the previous tempo. Now, taken all together, we've got a pretty good way to describe tempo and the alterations we make to it in our music. Not to mention a couple of great Italian words in our vocabulary now. We'll continue adding to this list as we go on, but this should be enough for now to cover our bases. Okay, if you made it this far, go on and give yourself a little pat on the back. I'm proud of you. We really covered a lot of material today in a short amount of time. If you still have lingering questions over any of it, I'd take a moment and go back to episode 1 or 2, where you're going to find more in-depth explanations of each topic. Also be sure that you're practicing the application of these concepts through the exercises that are included in our text, Music Fundamentals for Musical Theater. Every little bit of time and energy that you can invest into learning these concepts now will only help you as we go forward, since we're going to be using these ideas as the foundation for all of our studies to come. In the next video, we'll return to learning new material and we'll begin our unit on intervals. Until then, be kind to each other, and thanks for watching.